determine the ultimate quality of our life, never die, are never too late to be grasped. So for me in 2018, this is now 4 years ago, after I turned 21, I went to Spain for 6 weeks to walk 500 miles on one of the oldest pilgrimage routes in Europe, the Camino de Santiago. I walked the particular route known as the Camino Frances, or the French route or French way. And it was a dream I'd had for about 20 years. So that's the thing about having dreams. I first found out about it in my 40s and finally got to walk it about 20 years later. There I am with some of the folks I got to know along the way. Let's talk a little bit about pilgrimage. A pilgrimage is a journey to a sacred place or shrine. Any long journey or search, especially one of exalted purpose or moral significance. As pilgrims say, it's often about the journey and not the destination. So that's what I found. When I think about that, I think about the whole journey, not where I walked to. I went on the pilgrimage for spiritual reasons, as a way to reset my life as I entered a new phase. I was a book publisher for a couple of decades and decided it was time to leave that work and start something new as I entered my 60s. And so I wanted to do a reset. I wanted to take some time off, 6 weeks. We took a whole year off, but the first thing was to take 6 weeks to be totally disconnected. I went by myself. That means I walked solo, but I met hundreds of other pilgrims. And fortunately and happily, my wife joined me for the last week of the pilgrimage. In Europe in the Middle Ages, there were hundreds of pilgrimage destinations. Cathedrals usually housed the remains or the relics of saints. The most famous in England was Canterbury Cathedral, and that's Canterbury Cathedral. Probably the first time I heard about such a thing was in high school, when I had to struggle through reading in Middle English Chaucer's. I suddenly drew a blank. Anyway, his story on people going to Canterbury. That always happens to me. The most important thing gets lost at the second. I'll remember the name of Chaucer later anyway. By the way, Chaucer never finished his book. It was very ambitious, but he never quite finished. A cathedral is literally the place where a bishop resides or lives. But in the Middle Ages, they built these exalted cathedrals like this one here to house the relics of the saints. In Canterbury Cathedral, it was the relics of Thomas a Becket, or St. Thomas. And his was one of the most popular sites in the Middle Ages, was probably it was definitely the most popular in England. Even a journey to ancient sites such as Stonehenge back in thousands of years ago, that may have been something similar to a pilgrimage. In other words, that was a sacred journey they were taking back then. People still go to Stonehenge today. I've been there twice. It was a bit of a journey, a bit of a pilgrimage to go there to see this sacred place that has amazes us all, how they built it, and not only how they built it, but the way they constructed it. The history of the Camino de Santiago is this. It was thought to be the burial place of the Apostle James, one of Jesus' disciples, and people have been walking there to go to his burial place for 1,200 years. In the Middle Ages, nearly 500,000 people walk there and back each year. So whereas a modern pilgrim like me flew to Europe, and then I took a train to the starting point in southwest France, pilgrims walked from wherever they were. So they might have walked 500 miles before they even started the place that I started at, and they had to walk back. This is a map showing the routes to Santiago de Compostela. There were 4 principal routes through France, and these are significant because pilgrims did come from much farther on. I found parts of the Camino de Santiago in Luxembourg and Germany, because people and they came from Switzerland, they came from Italy, they came from all over, but they tended to collect in these 4 cities, and then kind of would go with a group of people together, because travel in the Middle Ages wasn't safe. You could be set by robbers. And so people felt safety in numbers, and they gathered in Paris, Vézelay, Le Puy, and Arles. Those four main routes, you can see the Paris and the Vézelay route joined with the Le Puy route just before this town of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And that town there, Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, is actually where I began my pilgrimage. And the Camino Frances that people walk today generally begins in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and it goes 500 miles all the way across northern Spain to Santiago. There, in the Middle Ages, there were many routes. Let me see if I show a map of many of them. Well, I don't show the maps. There are many routes from all over Spain going to Santiago. The modern route follows the ancient route. And many of these towns and cities along the way sprang up to support pilgrims who were walking along the way to Santiago. And so when the pilgrimage was revived, in this route was particularly revived in the 1980s, those towns sprang back to life. The pilgrimage never completely stopped, but there were always a few pilgrims. And of course, you could fly and take a train to Santiago, and that would actually be a pilgrimage. You don't have to walk it. There's nothing that says the pilgrimage has to be a walk, but people in our day like to do it like they did it back then for particular reasons. They like to walk. For myself, in preparation for my pilgrimage, because this was a very important event for me, I developed a set of 7 principles that I would keep in mind. Number one, I will try to average about 25 kilometers or 15 miles per day. Okay, so I kind of have a set distance I wanted to walk each day on average. That was to keep myself going. I knew that if I walked that much each day, I would make it in the time I had allotted for it. Secondly, I will make no reservations for lodging. I will simply accept whatever accommodations are available when I reach a destination. This is one of the beauties of the Camino Frances and other routes going to Santiago, is that the pilgrim hostels, which are known as albergues, you just walk in, you show them your pilgrim credential, which I'll show, and you can get lodging. Not anybody else can get it. You can't drive up or ride up on a motorcycle and say, hey, I want a room or a bed. You can't do that. So you generally just show up and you get a bed if there's one available. So that's what I decided I was going to do, because I would not do much planning. Yes.
May I ask questions? Right, I don't want to.
Please ask questions.
Since it's so when you said that someone who came up in a motorcycle, whatever, they won't be able to get lodging, meaning at all, or only until after all the pilgrimages get. I mean, is it first? You know what I'm saying? They're not allowed at all, or they're only allowed after everyone who's on a pilgrimage is housed.
Right. So in any town or village or city, there are levels of accommodations. There are hotels, there are pensions, bed and breakfasts. Those all generally serve the general public, and anybody who arrives anywhere can stay there. But the pilgrim hostels, which are called albergues, are strictly reserved for pilgrims who are on foot or on bicycle. And they're inexpensive. A bed might be 5 or 10 euros, somewhere along that line. Sometimes it includes a simple breakfast. There are pilgrim meals, which anyone can get for about 8 or 10 euros. Also, there are places I'll mention which are called donativo, which means you can pay there by donation.